We are back, baby. The Auto Trends Podcast. I know you've missed us. You thought we were gone. No, 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 no. We are back. And we have a very special guest with us today, a legend. But before we get to the legend of the automotive at carparts.com, I want to say we welcome our guests, our listeners to the Auto Trends Podcast. We have been so excited about having Ryan on to the podcast, really to just talk about the future of where we're going with artificial intelligence, so many more things. But more importantly, this is about the industry. This is about you. This is about kind of what is happening today in automotive, how we're going to approach it, and what we are basically doing. And so without further ado, we would like to welcome our guest, Ryan Henderson of carparts.com, been in the business for 16 years in automotive, really a big forward leader, specializing in AI applications. And so we're going to really talk a lot about those pieces today. It's just really how is our automotive industry evolving and changing and whatnot, and where's AI coming, and really what the future looks like. How do you apply it into your business? So I will say, Ryan Henderson, welcome to the Auto Trends Podcast, man.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah. No, man, it was really great. I'm glad we got to connect out at ACE. So I think it was really an awesome week for everybody. And I think, the most important thing that really we want to do today is really just talk a lot about kind of your background. I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you got in the industry. I think the industry is an incredible, just a place that once you find automotive and once you get into the industry, it sucks you in like nobody's business. So it certainly has happened to me, and like I just enjoy it so much. I enjoy the people, but yeah, man, would love to just understand a little bit more about yourself. And you guys are doing some really cool shit at carparts.com. So
yeah, no, thank you, appreciate that. Yeah, so my background is all automotive. So honestly, I've only worked in automotive my entire career. I started off working as a tire installer. That was like my first kind of foray into the auto industry. So I broke my back, installing tires all day long. That's actually like the lightest I've ever been in my life weight-wise was when I worked at a tire store, because it was like just insanely hard physical work and labor. Yeah. So like when I see those guys, running around the shop like that, I really appreciate that because I've been there. And then from there, my friend and I got really deep into like mid-'80s BMWs, the 3 Series E30s. And we actually ended up opening a shop together. My friend opened the shop and I went and worked for him. And we did like high performance cars for a while until we found out that that's not where the money necessarily is, and got deep into like OE maintenance. Like, after someone's car rolls off of warranty, that's when we started doing some of like those jobs, like some of those 3 Series that were direct injection, the walnut blasting to make sure that, there wasn't getting gunk on the top. So just things like that. So I was a mechanic for a short time. And after that, I got into kind of the corporate side, working for AEM Electronics, who makes like ECUs, gauges, things like that. And that's like where it really kind of like dug deep. So I was already into cars deep before I got into the auto industry. But that was like, I started racing. I did Spec E30 for a while. It just turned into like less of a hobby and more into a full-time passion and like career. And then from there, I went and worked for 4 Wheel Parts. So that's kind of where I dipped my toes in e-commerce for the first time, and 4-wheel drive, off-road kind of stuff, overlanding. Eventually made my way to MPA, Motor Car Parts America. So I was a little bit with manufacturing. And then I eventually ended up at carparts.com for the first time. And then David, our CEO, is going to love this story. I went back to MPA and then back to Car Parts again. So I did the double boomerang. From MPA to Car Parts, MPA to Car Parts. So it's all been automotive my whole career, up and down. And like you said, it's just like once I got into it, it's crazy how much it sucks you in a way that both as a passion, as a hobby, and just professionally as well. As people are like, hey, do you think you'll ever leave automotive? I was like, I don't know if I could, if I wanted to. Is that like there's so much knowledge, information, and things that like I've picked up over the years, piece by piece. It's such a deep and wide industry that I don't know if that would be even a good idea to leave automotive, but I don't want to anyways, because I enjoy it. I really genuinely enjoy being around cars.
Well, that's what I like. So I'm not like a big gearhead or anything. I was introduced to the industry to David Honig, the president of the parts house at the time, who he has since retired. I came out of my MBA and I just didn't even have any idea about like automotive. And the second you get into it, God, it just sucks you in. Like, and then you start to learn, kind of to your point, there's so many different areas and different sub verticals, right? The performance side where it's like really into we're trying to get an output of X, and then you have the replacement side, anything that goes into the warranty. You have the OE side, and there's just so many different nicks and crannies.
Yeah.
That you can move into. But I think now we're talking a lot about technology, right? We're talking a lot about how is the industry moving forward past the old kind of like the 70s and 80s and 90s where you have these little pockets, and it's like I remember going to the parts store with my dad, and it was like there's somebody behind the counter just getting the right part for our vehicle, and no one knew how any of it worked, right? It was just like this dark hole. And so like I feel the same way. I can't see myself going into any other industry right now because I don't want to.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting that the intersection between technology and what historically is not very technological or forward thinking industry is happening today. So that's the thing, is that like if you do a Venn diagram of kind of the old school carbureted car guy who knows everything, right? Like that's the person who's normally cataloging parts of the company. And the Excel is kind of newer to them even in those ways. And then you have the other side of you have like the people who are genuine computer science degree majors who have never seen worked on a car, they just drive in it kind of thing. And those are people that you're intersecting at these companies these days, and that need to work with one another. And it's a crazy, I don't know, juxtaposition of two different people, of this hardcore technology person, this hardcore automotive person, trying to work with each other to make a website, a marketing team, whatever it might be. Is that these people have to work very closely with one another, and it's crazy to see the kind of like work that has to happen to translate between the two different languages of people. Of like, hey, this fits everything 75 Chevy, and then you have to turn that into data within aces and pies, whatever it might be, and that translation is really difficult and crazy. Never mind, like some of these cars these days, is that you're turning into a software engineer when you work on some of these newer cars versus someone who's like breaking their knuckles on a carbureted vehicle. So it's like even the people who are working on the cars have to be more technologically minded and understand how technology works.
Well, but that's where we're at. It's this weird place in the industry because you have some of these older gearheads, right? That were like, they're just not a believer. My first job, I was actually a ranch hand for a farmer, and he wouldn't buy any truck over the year of 87 because he was like, it gets too much, and he had all these reasons. And I was like, well, it's like 2004, man. And all of his trucks were like 1987 or below. And I'm like, but that's the reality of where we're living at. And as we look at technology, but one question I kind of would love your insights, because I think you have a very interesting background, is starting out at, kind of the tire business. Obviously I've been a lifer at Discount Tire. The service, everything about that is so good. And, but regardless, my question kind of is like, where do you think the techs are going? Because I've always felt like techs were like underserved, and outside of even this podcast, I'd love to kind of pick your brain, Ryan, about I'd love to create a foundation kind of to help and support the technicians in our industry, and use the Auto Trends podcast as a platform to really propel that. But I'd love to understand, where do you think that's going? Like, how is the tech? Where are they evolving? Because they have to evolve. You evolve or die.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And by the way, I worked at Discount Tire, which is America's Tire here in Southern California. So
You got the look, man. You got the look, man. You got the like if you just walked in and like hire the guy, you got the look, he's got it all, he's got the smile, bam.
It's so funny because it's like, I fit in very well at that company, and it did really well by me. I loved working for that company, and it was very well run and structured. And to this day, if I ever see someone, I always make a comment about how I used to work there. And, you worked at Cal 29. Oh, that's back when, this guy. So it's a very cool community. So great point. And it's funny because I am the technician who evolved, right? Like, is that
totally.
That happened to me. So I fully understand that process. Maybe it was a little bit less of like the kind of, I didn't work at a dealership. It was just my buddy and I. Whatever it might be. So it was a little bit less of like the conventional tech flow. But I do think that, techs, they get to a certain point of proficiency and they realize that their skills, whether they're just that they're really good at working with their hands, they can go do something else and maybe make a little bit more money on their own. Because working for a dealership, there is a lot of overhead. And you're basically, you bring your own tools most of the time, and you're paying for those. And it's like, although they're charging $100, $200 an hour, you're seeing a fraction of that. And unless you're like very, very skilled, it's very hard to make like good money in that. There are
Sure.
people who are just out of this world, insanely good mechanics, and they can just, it's like book time says 6 hours and they do it in 2 hours, and that's easy money for them. But unless you're that like, naturally skilled or very, very good mechanic, it is very difficult to kind of make that happen. So you'll see them kind of go into other trades. Maybe that's construction, or might be because they're good with their hands, but not
Yeah.
necessarily in that kind of
Interesting.
field. Or for me,
Yeah.
like, so my pathway into corporate, which was a little bit weird, was AEM electronics, but I was like tech support.
Yeah.
So people would call in and say, "Hey, I'm trying to install this ECU on this car with this motor. Can you help me with that?" So it was like I took my automotive knowledge that I had from being a mechanic. And I'm gonna say mechanic loosely because I was a very bad mechanic, from being someone who installed parts on cars, and I was able to, speak on a phone with someone, help them install on their vehicle. So there are pathways depending on what you want to go, if you want to apply that knowledge differently to something else. But I think staying in the trades is a great place to be if you can understand what that path looks like for you. Is that if you do want to become a master tech, do you want to become the guy who's running the shop, or are you going to just keep refining your trade and become someone who really turns book hours out very quickly and is able to be very efficient at their job? So it's like, I'd like to help people understand that this isn't something that you just do tactically day to day. This is a career that you're building towards, and what do you want to do? What really interests you? Because some people, like I've met people who just love wrenching on cars, and that's totally okay path to go.
Yeah.
But just understand that that's okay to do. Like, you don't need to, go be something in corporate. Is that sitting in an office is not for everyone. It's really difficult to make that transition. So I think it'd be super important to sit down with these guys and just say, what do you want to do? What really interests you and makes you happy? And then setting up that pathway for them and saying, hey, well, if you want to be, a foreman, that's one different thing. If you want to go to corporate, it's a different thing. Going into motorsports is a whole different thing. Just understand you have to travel the country. You can't really have a, established family in, one space, because you're going to be traveling the country. There's so many options and so many places to go. And even some places is just do what you're doing and just get better at it, and you'll make more money as you go.
Yeah, so when I even came in the industry, I was, I like doing odds and ends on my vehicle, but I was never really super connected to kind of that technician world. I've got to imagine that's another community in itself. And that's one thing that I have, been pretty intentional about, is engaging more of that community, because it's so important, man. It is just so important. And, you kind of get in this, caught up in this world of the manufacturers and distribution and big online, retailers like yourself at Car Parts, and what you guys have been doing there with all of kind of what is the next level, what's the future. And I just always felt that the technicians, it's like, yeah, you have this big slick sales guy for some big, massive manufacturer. And it's like, man, let's not forget about the tech, man. Like, I don't know why I feel very strongly about that. And we're in the process of creating kind of a foundation to help funnel, just support financially, support from a platform. I don't know. It's just important to myself. Yeah. But let's hop in, man. I'd love to learn a little bit more. And I know you spoke a lot in Chicago at Connect on AI, but I think a lot of our industry, and this is kind of my sense, and I could be wrong, but my sense is that, artificial intelligence, AI, how do you develop your business to the next level? We know, and I've said it before, I would trade 5 sales guys in for one awesome cataloger, because we know, as you know, in the business of online parts sales at carparts.com, people don't sell parts, but the catalog sell parts, the rich data, the making sure the item fits my vehicle for right when I need it. I don't go buy an alternator because I just want that beautiful, sexy pack of energy. I will go buy it because I have mine's broke, right? I have to go fix it. So when we look at these kind of next level, practices with generative AI, walk us through really a high level definition of what is that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that we always like to start with the customer first. I think this is a super, just like you said, is that I think I heard this from someone recently, and it really blew my mind. They're like, who's throwing the box away? And that means that, so we're not worried about who buys it or who has it in their hand. Is that who's going to take that part install it and throw the box away that it was in, because that's the person we care about the most, and that's usually the installer or whoever it might be, right? DIY person. It was Levi from Parsley, a very, very smart guy, and he told me that, and it blew my mind, right? And I think that that's something that we work backwards from, and that's where you start implementing AI and machine learning, because AI, machine learning, whatever it might be, is really good at part of the funnel, right? Is that the funnel of the purchasing is at the bottom of the funnel is a person who throws a box away. The top is the entry modes into that. So that's, someone shopping on Google or, doing research or whatever it might be is at the top of the funnel. And then how they get down to that bottom part where it's like, hey, this is the part I need for my car, and I'm going to install it. Someone else is going to install it, whatever it might be. We work backwards from there as much as we can. So we kind of look at the person who threw the box away and say, why did they choose that part? Oh, it's because someone gave it to them. So a person brought it in for a DIY or a DIFM to install for them. How did they find it? How did you work backwards from there? And that's where AI, once you kind of find out how people have come through that pathway to the finality, you can start using generative AI to make some of the data more human readable. Is I think that we do a great job, and we're working on making data more structured and more aligned to make computers really easily. But then at some point it loses a little bit of its humanity, a little bit of its like understandability to the basic person. And that's where we would use something like generative AI to take a very complex, long statement that makes sense to a computer, but then translates it into human speak a lot better. And people use different terms regionally is a huge thing for us too. So it's like, whatever someone calls it East Coast versus West Coast isn't the same thing. When someone calls it in European versus, domestic, very different thing. There's like I think on European vehicles, they're called DISA valves, DISA valves. And it's basically like an intake flat valve. And then a domestic person would never call it a DISA valve, and vice versa. A European would never call it like an intake valve or a runner valve, whatever it might be. So that's where you start thinking about the duality of your customers and what they do, what they don't do. You can start dictating these processes and this data to your individual customer and making them really feel like they're getting the right part. And that's to your point about cataloging, is that although a salesperson at the front desk is only as good as the data that they have. And we're helping them understand at a very, very minute level, down to a SKU, that this is the right part. You can be confident that you're buying this right part for the right car, right fix. And I know there's a million different pieces in there, but in the entire vertical, right, where it's like the person buying the part to how they enter the website, there are 100 different uses for generative AI and machine learning AI to get to that final point of sale.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess I've never really put a lot of thought into it. Obviously, from a parts business, and our industry is 100% global. It's transportation, right? It's transportation around the world. And then when you look at the terminology around what people call certain things from continent to continent, or your geographic region, even in North America, could be much different. So it's almost like when you take the technology, the cataloging, and you parse it out to different regions, it's almost kind of like using an AI type of practice to help kind of evolve that to another level where maybe you don't have to have a team of 25. You can use smart practices with generative AI to help kind of solution. That's kind of where my mind snaps on that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think it basically, it's, the 90-10 or 80-20 rule, or whatever you want to call it, is that it can do 80% of this kind of correction or generation. And then 20% you generally have humans look at. Is that humans, although AI machine learning is huge and great, is that humans, the kind of like artistic side of humans, is almost unmatched. And I don't know if we'll even in the near future have a machine that can do as good as humans can on some of these pieces. So it's basically what I always call is it's a force multiplier, right? So it's just like a lever, is that if you give someone generative AI and a good tool, and you give them good training on it, anytime that they put one word in, 20 more can come out. And the same kind of quality and content as well. So it's a force multiplier in all those ways, that it can allow one person to do a lot more work. It will never replace an individual person, but it does allow them to have a much wider net cast across.
So when we start thinking about that piece, like I always kind of think of the industry in three segments, right? You have the manufacturers, you have your distribution, which we know historically manufacturers have tried to cut them out sometimes, but it's just not going to work because they service all of those really small customers in their geographic location. And then you have kind of your online piece, right? So it kind of is bucketed in three categories. Where do you think the most important use of, say, a generative AI should be happening today? Should it be happening at the manufacturing level, big, small, medium? It should be happening at the distribution level, or a mix of all three?
Yeah, no, I am very kind of like I'm biased in this
Of
opinion,
course.
so maybe a
Yeah.
grain of salt, right? Is that like this is very close to my near and dear to my heart, but I think the whole vertical. I don't think that there's a bad spot for it. It's just another tool in the toolbox. Is that the way I always describe to people is it's like a hammer, right? Is that you never use a hammer to tighten up your lug nuts on your vehicle, right? And
Right.
vice versa is you never use a torque wrench to hit in a nail on the side of your house. I think AI is just happens to be one of those tools. It's maybe more closer to like a Swiss Army knife in that way, that
Sure.
it's better for a lot of different things. But it's just another tool, and it's got its limited uses. But I think every business stands to, and this is a broad statement, but I think every business stands to benefit from implementing generative AI at some level. And that might even just be giving good training to your employees on how to use, I'm going to name drop ChatGPT. That happens to be my favorite tool, right?
Sure.
Is that just giving your employees a idea of how to use it correctly and not breaching any of your policies and what it's good at and what's bad at. I think everyone stands to gain some efficiencies from that. And that might even just be someone who is building lots of Excel sheets for your company and they don't know how to necessarily make the right equation for something. You can explain that to ChatGPT and say, hey, I have a sheet. I want you to take A2 and multiply it by B4 and then whatever you need to do and explain to it textually. And it will make you an equation pretty proficiently. And you can check your data and make sure that everything goes correctly. But it just saved that person, call it 30 minutes, an hour. But if you do 30-minute hour time savings per person per day, that adds up very quickly. Is that, let's say that, like personally speaking, it's probably a 3 to 4 times X time savings for me. So let's say I put an hour into a program or something I'm working on. That would normally take me 4 hours without ChatGPT. So if you take that per person across an organization, your time savings and efficiency savings are gigantic.
I think that's probably the most, I think you just nailed it. And in my head, because I've been to a lot of AI conferences and where they talk about what the future is. And I always struggled to kind of walk away with, how can I apply this to my profession, my industry today? Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people struggle with that. It's like, okay, I got the presentation. It was awesome. But how do I apply it? Like what's my takeaway? And
Yeah.
I've always thought of the takeaway when you start to look at something as the future and you're kind of unknown is really incremental steps, right? I don't think you necessarily need to have AI touch every piece of your business. I don't believe that until you're ready for it. But I think you start very much in small incremental steps. And I think to your point, that is probably an incredible recommendation to say, let's just start and create a very simple policy to make sure it's in line with our organization to really, how can we eliminate what would take you 4 hours now takes you 30 minutes, or what maybe you had to go back and look at, revisit some kind of mathematical equation or formula or something that maybe it can help speed that up, right?
Yeah.
But I think those are the small little incremental wins where that would have taken me 2 hours as an employee, right? Because our objective is the same. We're looking for an outcome, right? We're looking for a business outcome. We're not looking for, well, I spent 80 hours on this project. Okay, what was the outcome? Well, I spent 10 hours on the project. Okay, what was the outcome? Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. And I think that's one thing that I subscribe to very strongly is I don't care about the hours. I care about the outcomes. What is the outcome we're after? And so I think when we talk and this comes up and when we talk about this, it's really important to just find, if you're like, man, I don't believe in the internet, or I don't even know if AI is here, it's not going to apply to our business. Okay. I challenge you, or I to just find one small area and then measure the improvement, right? That now you're in. That's the incremental step. You have to look, when we start to look at generative AI, we start to look at how it's, and now you just kind of slowly ebb and flow into potentially something greater that really supports the business outcomes of your organization. Am I far off there?
No, you're exactly right in the way that I think just giving people access to it's the first step. Is that not everyone
Yeah.
benefits from Excel, right? So if you give every organization Excel and say you have to use this, someone who's on the floor, in packaging, they're not going to use Excel. They can benefit from other tools as well. So the first step is give access to everyone, and before that is giving good policies and good training. It could just be an hour training, maybe half an hour, 20 minutes even, just saying, hey, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. Very simple setup, and you can even have ChatGPT help you write some of that. It will be biased, just so you know.
Yeah.
But just a simple policy up front that says this is how you use it, here's how you don't use it, and then give everyone access. There's free tools out there if you're not interested in investing in a paid option. There are free tools. You can go out there, go online and look them up. There's tons out there. I won't name drop too many of them, but just give access to your company in a secure and well thought out way. I think is the best first step for any of these companies, and let people find out their use cases. Go in there. So, I mean, when this first, when AI has been around since the 70s, 60s, 70s,
Yeah.
it's nothing new, right? But since ChatGPT came out, that's when I got really involved in the space. And I didn't know what to do with it at first, but I spent hundreds of hours talking to it back and forth, finding out what it was good at, finding what it was bad at. And eventually I've narrowed it down to my use cases where I know I use Google for certain things, or if I use a paper catalog for another thing, or I have my use cases, and it's just that kind of tool in the toolbox mentality. But giving it to your entire organization, or just specific parts of your organization, and saying, go use it, find out if it's useful for you or not. Here's some good use cases. And then they come back and someone says, well, this isn't useful for me. Fine. We're not going to force this tool on you. Just understand that, you have access to us if you're interested, and you'll find 3 or 4 people who take off with it and run with it.
That's it. That's where I was going with it. I feel like when you're an organization, whether you're massively huge or you're small, mid, right? Because everyone's in a different journey as far as what their definition of success is, right? There's plenty of small manufacturers that do a couple $1,000,000 a year that are very, very happy and they're very niched, right? But I think when we look at generative AI, is a little bit of exploratory, right? It's a little bit of R&D. And if you don't give somebody at least a little bit of rope to kind of explore, right? Just get lost in it a little bit.
Yeah.
You'll do yourself a disservice. And kind of my sense is that when you look at, okay, we give people and we push them, right? But then we come back on a quarterly basis, or we come back on a biannual basis, and we now solicit feedback. What is it good at? What is it bad at? What we're doing in the background of that is we're actually running a analysis, like a case study.
Yeah.
And now as leadership, when we think of, because leadership, ultimately your objective is to avoid things that you can foresee in the future that navigate your organization to a level of success, right? That you feel profitable, right? That's what leadership is. That's why great leaders get paid bigger bucks, is their foresight. If they're constantly running into bumps and they can't see the future, well, they're probably not going to be in that position for very long, right? That's reality. But I think when you harness and you equip your organization, because what I've learned about people, and this is a people question, discussion, is people really are creative, and they really kind of getting into their own world. When someone's in their own element without feeling the stresses of bullshit, they can do some awesome things, man.
No, that's absolutely, yeah.
And I just think when you give somebody and say, go explore and just figure this out, kind of what, and then you come back and now we have a productive outcome. And now it's okay, this works for this area, but maybe not for this area. But what you're doing is you're unconsciously putting your organization in a position to succeed in the future.
Yeah. No, and my dream has always been you never would make an artist make the frame, make the canvas, make the paint. Is that's like a waste of time, is you want the artist to paint, right? So you want them to use those pieces, right? And I think that happens a lot in organizations, is that you have someone who is an artist in their own sense, and you make them make Excel sheets all day long. And that's what their job is to make Excel sheets. Is if you can elevate them away from that super tactical day-to-day grind and let them be creative in their own sense, that is going to be huge for organization. Is that there are people there at your company who are amazing at making Excel spreadsheets all day long, but that's not what they're good at. They're actually much more of a creative person. And if you can free people's minds from some of that super tactical, grindy, work that we all have to do, and let AI take care of some of that, they're free to go explore different parts of the business and turn over all the rocks and say, this is probably messed up. We should fix this. And that's where real dollars come from. So, I mean, it's easy to look at like, efficiency gains at the front, but then there are long-term benefits you're going to receive by getting people out of the tactical grindiness and getting them to like being more, artist-like.
Well, it's like, and we'll touch on it here in a sec, but it's like Elon Musk said, and I'm probably not going to get this quote perfect, but it's kind of, with AI and the developments, and it's developing very quickly, that jobs are merely going to become potentially a hobby. I don't know if you heard that, but what's your thoughts?
I haven't heard that. No. Yeah, I think that we will always find use for humans to be. Is that like I'd like to think that like AI would let us, escape day to days, but I think it's going to be a lot more artistic. I think is what I'm really excited about. Right?
That's what I gathered from that.
Yeah.
It's going to enable you to really just be free and do the things that you really want to do and empower you almost.
Yeah. No, in the same sense as that, like, talking about technician to corporate kind of thing, is that I'm also that use case of that, like turning from someone who's doing very tactical, grindy work to someone who's a lot more using like my artistic, imagination side now. Is that's most of my day to day these days. Is yes, I'm generating tons and tons of data, but I'm not personally like grinding it out, changing Excel spreadsheets. Is I made the programs that were able to do that. And then now I can go think and sit down and look at the organization of carparts.com and say, where are our inefficiencies? Where do we stand to gain? And how do we make the customer experience better? So it's like, I kind of have seen a little bit the other side. Don't get me wrong. I have my fair share of 5-6 hours a day doing very tactical work, but that leaves me an hour or two a day or 3 to do some of that more kind of forward thinking. How do we look at this as an organization and make things better for everyone?
I think that's the key. I want to touch on something because I know EV is a big topic. And when I think of EV, I also think of AI, right? I've ridden in and driven. I don't own an electric vehicle, but like you ride in a Tesla, it's really a computer. There's a lot of AI pieces I think that are connected into there at some level. What do you think the future is when we look at automotive? Obviously, what we do for the industry is transportation, and it's going to evolve, right?
Yep.
I don't think combustion engine is going anywhere in the short term. I think we've kind of skipped the hybrid step, so we're kind of backtracking, I think, a little bit. But still, EVs are a great asset. What do you think when you kind of look ahead?
Yeah. No, I think kind of going back to the earlier subject as well is that we will, as a industry, have to evolve and get a little more technology friendly, down to even the technician level, right? Is that you look at all these sensors that are going in these cars, ADAS sensors, forward warning sensors, just these cameras. They're just cameras on some of these vehicles, but they're specially tuned cameras and special kinds of cameras. And it's kind of been proven that the OEs can't fully support the aftermarket 100%. That's why aftermarket exists. A lot of ways. So we're going to have to learn how to, support some of these really advanced technologies. So, starting at the technician side is that technicians will have to get training and have to figure out aftermarket support for these vehicles and how to program them and work on them. So that's something that we're going to have to figure out going into the future. But that's like a whole industry, level kind of thing. As far as like, say, parts distribution aftermarket, I think deep AI or machine learning, generative AI integration into these companies is going to be huge for all of us. Yes, but also at some point is that people are going to be thirsty for original content, human content. So I think that, is that I dream of the day that generative AI takes over the boring, mundane tasks. And to our point earlier is that I think the future is going to be people who are creative and who can break the mold of this generative AI, because everyone's going to pump out tons of generative AI content. People are going to crave, homemade content, stuff that's human grade. Even to the point where they're going to be looking for imperfections because it marks that this was kind of curated by humans instead of computer. So I think that's personally where I think that like our manufacturing to customer pipeline is going to be a lot more efficient, but then it's going to also turn into like, okay, how do we market this and sell it in a way that it makes it more human and it's more supported by humans.
I did the human piece, man. I just human people really enjoy the emotion, the laughing, that quirkiness, right? Everyone's got a different personality. And, you look back and you have some friends that were funny and serious and some dry humor. I mean, that's just what we are. Like we're just kind of coexist. And I think when you start to look at these, AI, we get really deep into it. People be like, that's, and it's going to be like, that's AI. Just chuck it away, right?
Yeah.
That's a computer. Chuck it away. And I just believe that it's a balancing act, right? How does it make us more effective, and how do we improve the business outcome by still being that personality, right? Because you typically remember things and people based on their personalities and how you interacted, and was it positive, was it negative? Oh, I have a negative experience with that guy because he's just a little bit of a grumpy guy. Oh, the other guy's kind of happy-go-lucky. You know what I mean? You have all these different pieces, but so I think it's really interesting as we evolve. But one thing I want to touch on is everybody's seen the price of cars. They've absolutely gone bazookas, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I used to think, like what happened to the $12,000, Civic or whatever, right? Or like, okay, that's reasonable. Now we're at like, okay, you can't even walk out of a dealership with like a 50,000, 60, 70, shit. $100,000 is like the new $20,000. It feels like. I know you've talked a little bit about it, but the $1,000 car, man.
Yeah. Well, that's my passion, is the $1,000 car, but that's because I love breaking my knuckles on rusty, dirty cars and spending way too much time in the garage. Like, if anyone is not a mechanic, it's not a good financial decision to buy a $1,000 car. There's even a whole song about it. Like, I think it's called $1,000 Car. And the whole song is like this guy just singing about how much has ruined his life because it's just like eating his money and, leaking oil in his driveway. But that's like, if you are interested in that and you're able to DIY it, then they're awesome. I'm a huge fan. I've owned 10, 20 different $1,000 cars over the years. So huge fan of those. But like, I think that the whole, skyrocketing cost thing also ties into the kind of EV that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
EVs are difficult right now because of resource limitations that you're talking about, cobalt or any of these metals, right? Is that we're just not able to mine them fast enough. And, in a humane way as well, because some of the practices that we've seen are not great. But the other piece I've talked about is I talked to a Rivian engineer once, and he's like, oh, the number one, headwind to this is the infrastructure. Is that you imagine like everyone in your neighborhood, let's say all of a sudden 80% of people in your neighborhood buy an EV, the lines will blow. Like there's no way that you can get that much electricity to all these vehicles as well.
Right.
So I love EV. I think it's an amazing driving experience because it's clean. You get 100% torque at 0 RPM. Now, these are like, I'm talking as a gearhead, not as like a holistic.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, no. As a performer, yeah, absolutely. No.
And insane. Like the day that they come out with like a full electric AE86, rear wheel drive that can go a couple hundred miles, I'll be first in line, because the track day in a full electric rear wheel drive kind of sports car would be insane. Like it would be the most fun car on the track you could ever think of. But it's in that weird space where they're trying to grow as fast as possible and they're realizing there's a lot of headwinds. So, I mean, I've personally put a lot of my own feelings and, support behind hybrid. I think it's a great middle option right now. It lets us grow the resource development side efficiently, but also allows us to work on the infrastructure side of it as well. And then it's a great in between, because I think internal combustion engines, we've perfected them for 100 years now, and they're super efficient and they can be cleaner than they used to be. But then you have the EV side that it's like a plug-in hybrid, and then that way it's like you're not overloading the grid. So I believe in that kind of transition is going to happen one day, but we have a lot of headwinds in both how we make the vehicles themselves and how we supply them with energy. So kind of like backtracking to why vehicles are so expensive as well, is it inflation and then just the technology. I mean, exactly to your point, right, is that we're cramming tons of tech into these cars, and a lot for the better is that, the forward-looking systems, rear-ending a vehicle is nearly a thing of the past. Is that, coming up to a stoplight and hitting someone. I think they just came up with a law recently, right? It's, I think, like 2028, all vehicles have to have a forward warning system, I believe.
Protect the 16-year-olds from freaking banging into somebody.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I look at my daughter. I look at my daughter. She's 2 years old. I'd say, oh, when you're 16, you're going to smoke so many people. The car she drives required. You know what I mean?
Yep. And I think that you won't have a choice at that point unless you're buying the $1,000 cars from 2020. 2021.
98 Toyota Tercel, baby.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that like there's a lot of people who kind of like have to buy new for their lifestyles and what they want, and that's just unavoidable. Try to find the best deal you can. But if there's people who are like lightly into DIY, just learning some of the basics, you can, $5,000-$10,000 cars are totally usable cars, and learning how to work on those. And then when you really get deep into it and get sucked into it, is $1,000 cars is kind of where my heart and joy are. So I love finding one on like Craigslist or Facebook or something like that. And this one's got a car that you saw was 4,000. They keep cutting it, and they have in the bottom some kind of disclaimer in full bold text that says like, "This car doesn't run," or "The brakes don't work." And I'm like, all right, come to pop. I show up with my truck and a trailer, and I'm like, show up with cash. I'm like, let's make this work. Let's make this happen.
That is awesome. Well, Ryan, as we come out on time, you're obviously active on LinkedIn. I mean, I think you're very passionate about what you do. I love talking to you about this stuff. But how can our industry, maybe our young techs, or maybe even some older level kind of executives that are starting to explore with AI, or even somebody who's connected or with car parts, and just to understand a little more of the industry, how do they get in touch with you, and how can you be of service to them, or can they, walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, no, LinkedIn would be a great place to contact me. That's where most of my professional contact goes through. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about any of this stuff. I think a big passion of mine is that I love teaching others this stuff, because it's super wide and tall industry. There's enough money out there for everyone. Is that the best thing we can do for each other is improve the customer experience and bring more customers in, because we will always benefit by bringing in someone else who isn't a DIYer, who doesn't necessarily use aftermarket parts. We all benefit by making that pool larger. And then once we slice it up, that's a different ball game. We'll figure that out. So I'm happy to talk to anyone about this stuff on how to use AI, my thoughts on the industry, whatever it might be, because the tide rises, all ships float. Is that we all do better when we raise the tide. So I'd say LinkedIn, message me, add me on LinkedIn. That's always a great place to reach me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just brilliant. I feel the same way. I just really want to see our industry move forward in a big way. I want profitability to be, next level for, our distributors, our manufacturers, our e-tailers, our online sellers, our repair, our technicians, our small mom and pop, part shops. I'm just so connected into it. And Ryan, we appreciate having you on. I think just purely your insights in generative AI and where you can first start as the business, just start to explore, right? Very, very small incremental pieces, and let that take a life of its own. Empower your people. Having you on is absolutely an honor on the Auto Trends podcast. And we appreciate you coming on. It's been awesome so far.
Well, thank you for having me. I look forward to discussing more of this in the future. Absolutely. And yeah, and to your point, get after it. Get out there, try it out, see if it's for you. That's the number one use case, and you'll find out if it's for you or not very quickly.
Awesome, folks. We are the Auto Trends podcast, the voice of the industry. Everyone have a wonderful day.